Hey everyone, welcome back to the Product House podcast. I'm your host, Julia Dressler, and in this episode, I'm joined by Matt Costa. Matt is a product leader with 2 decades of experience building products for software companies like Conqa, Datch, Auror, as well as his own startups. From UX design to leading product teams, Matt's journey offers key insights for founders and product leaders working in early software teams. Among other things, we discussed how you can make better strategic decisions about product, why having product direction and risk being wrong is better than not making product decisions to keep your options open, how you can go faster and build more product with less resources, and why founders should think twice before leaning on popular frameworks. So, if you're looking to build better products and find product market fit, this episode is packed with actionable insights from one of the best in the field. And before we get started, here's a quick word from our sponsor, Dummi. Dummi is a Chrome extension that helps product teams create instant, one-click bug reports with video replay and technical info, making it super easy to share and solve software issues fast when you're testing software. Click the link on the show notes to get started for free today, or go to dummi.com. That's dummi.com. Hi, Matt. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, thank you.
So you've been involved with product development across different industries and companies for over a decade now. To start us off, can you briefly walk us through your journey and how you got into product building in the first place?
Yeah, sure. So I got into product quite early in my career, somewhat by accident, but also a bit planned. I skipped university and did I think it was an 8-month, 10 months program on software development. Got a job after that, thinking that would be just another dev agency that we were just going to build websites, design and build websites for customers. But to my surprise, when I joined, they actually had a product. So this was 2008. It's quite some time ago. And back then it was very popular for people to have Flash websites, like Micromedia Flash, those animated websites full of effects all over the place. They were fancy, they were nice, but they were hard to maintain or update. So this first job I had as a web designer / developer was to work on that platform, this kind of CMS, this content management system that would allow customers to update their Flash website. So I had a lot to learn from that. But yeah, I think that's how I kind of got into product. I initially went into web design, web development. Thought I would be creating a bunch of websites, but fell in love with creating a product that delivers their service.
And how did you go from dealing with the Flash website to building product in some of the most iconic New Zealand-based startups?
Right. So there's a big jump from that time in 2008 to when I came to New Zealand. I left that job with 2 friends and we started creating our own products, experimenting with different things. Did that for a while, had a game company, then decided to move to New Zealand. And then I got a job here. I had a few different startups over the time because it was the closest thing to having my own startup. I always knew after that early experience and then spending a couple of years building products with those 2 co-founders back in Brazil, I always knew I wanted to go back to that. But since I moved to New Zealand, had a young family, I had to focus on getting a job and then work for startups to be as close as possible to that environment again. My passion was always on early stage startups, very early, day zero. I've found startups that were in that stage over here, not as iconic and popular back then, and had a great time working with them.
And when you first started working in startups as a product leader, what were some of the early lessons that you learned about building products that have stuck with you throughout your whole career?
I have 2 key lessons that I've been keeping top of mind recently. One is being right all the time is less important if you can iterate quickly, right? There's this pressure, especially if you're in a leadership position, to be right, to know what to do. And being right or wrong matters way less if you have velocity, if you can iterate. That's one big lesson. And the second one is about being able to adapt, about being intentional and applying things to your own situation, to the phase of the business that you're in, to the makeup of the team that you're working with, to your own situation, your own ways of working. Don't just take frameworks and advice and blindly apply it. Don't read something on a blog, an article, or you hear something on a podcast. Don't just go and apply it. Have a pause, have a think. How does this apply to me? And how do I adapt this to my own situation? I just talked about velocity, how important it is, and how it beats having to be right. But even that feedback, even that lesson, I have to be intentional about, because sometimes you have to slow down to speed up. Sometimes you have to think. Otherwise you just become a headless chicken. You're just pursuing different things all the time because you're iterating really quickly, but you're iterating on different things. You have to slow down sometimes and pause. So always adapt, always apply to your own situation. And also don't stress too much about being right all the time.
How do you strike that balance between going fast enough that you're iterating and trying new things, but going slow enough that you actually have time to know whether the way that you're going is the right or wrong way so that you can properly adapt? I struggle with that in Dummi a lot.
Yeah, it's hard to strike that balance. You need to have a direction, right? Even if it's broad, but you have to point somewhere and say, I'm going that way. And then once you have that, you have a strategy to how you're gonna move fast in that direction. You apply. You being focused. I think it's something you can either plan, like once a week, twice a month. I'm gonna, sit down and I'm gonna review my priorities. I'm gonna review where we're going. I'm gonna, in retrospective, look back and reassess, but have a direction. Because I think if you don't have a direction, then every week you're questioning, should I be working on this? Or maybe I should work on that thing instead. Or maybe the first feedback that hits you, oh, I heard something from a customer. I've been running with my own mind. I heard something from someone else. That's a signal. I'm going to chase that signal. You have to be able to be focused for a while and stay focused for a while, but periodically pause and look around, go for air, and then go back and stay focused.
You obviously worked with some founders that had pretty strong product visions for what they wanted from their products. How did you find working with the founders and aligning their vision with the user feedback that you were receiving? What if the user said, hey, actually, I hate this. We should be doing this other thing. And the founder goes, no, actually, we should continue in that direction, regardless of the feedback. Did you ever have a situation like that?
Yes, I think if the feedback contradicts the vision, I think that the most important thing is don't try to, by brute force, merge the feedback with your own vision. Don't twist it. Yeah. Just acknowledge, accept, understand, perhaps classify, group, put the feedback somewhere. We shouldn't be afraid of saying no to things, internally or externally. If it comes from a customer, if it comes from a leader within the company, you have to be intentional enough to say no when you have to. So if the feedback contradicts, don't force merge, don't twist it, but understand and learn from it. If it does align, great, that's more fuel. But again, you need to have that strong vision and you need to be able to link the feedback to it if it makes sense. If not, have a collection of ideas and requests and feedback, classify them, group them, and let it sit for a while. If you get more of the same feedback, it will bubble up and then you spend time processing and understanding more deeply.
Did you have to have quite hard or difficult conversations with the founders? Did you ever receive lots of feedback and then it bubbled up and you're like, okay, I have all this feedback. We're going the wrong way. I now need to find a way to talk to the founder about this and figure out ways forward.
Funnily enough, I think I didn't have as much of that as I would have liked. What happens most of the time is you go to market or you do your research trying to prove or disprove something that you already put together, right? You have an assumption, you have a bet, something you're pursuing, and you go to learn and understand more about that. And we're all biased in our own ways. I wish I had more contradicting feedback, looking back now. The moments I did have feedback that were different from what we were pursuing, again, I waited until it bubbled up enough that it wasn't a difficult conversation because you go to the table and you say, hey, there are 14 feedback here from 6 different customers. And there's a very strong pattern across all of them that we should be doing this. If suddenly you have something that's strong enough that you have 14, proof points that you should be doing this thing, you bring it to the table, and it's not a difficult conversation as such. It's an amazing thing. We discovered this problem, this painful thing that many people are having, and there is a way to align it with what we're doing. Then it's just a matter of prioritizing, planning, and experimenting and doing that. If it's a very different thing that doesn't align at all, it could be sexy, could be interesting, but if it doesn't align, it doesn't align. Sometimes it's not worth it. And there are many great things you could do, but you can't do all of them at once. You have to choose, and that's the hard reality. You have to choose, and you have to grow with it.
Yeah, that's really tough. Hey, like the art of choosing and choosing well. And sometimes it feels like everything in hindsight is easy to see what the answer is. But when you're actually in the
Totally.
moment trying to figure it out, what to prioritize when you have this product and this vision and also user feedback, it can be quite convoluted.
Yes, yes. But the worst thing is not to choose. It's not choose. It's to just avoid choosing. That's the worst thing.
How do people avoid choosing if you have to keep building product?
I guess you get into a comfortable space where you have all these frameworks that people tell you should follow. And you have sprints and they run in 2 weeks. And then you kind of use that to shield yourself or to feel good about the decisions you're making. Like, I only have to make a decision for the next sprint, for the next 2 weeks. And I know what we're doing. So we have to stick to that. And then the week after that, someone else has a strong opinion on doing something. We can fit that into the next sprint. The next 2 sprints are sorted. And then you kind of go with, there's enough work for people to do. We have an okay idea of what we should be pursuing. And then you fool yourself that there's enough work in the pipeline. The roadmap is already, set because there's no shortage of ideas and things that could go into the roadmap. And I think not choosing looks like you get the thing in the backlog that makes sense or that people are vocal about and you do it. And then if something else comes up and people are more vocal about that, or the sales team goes and say, if only we had that feature, we'd be able to sell way more. And then you just work on that. You're not intentionally choosing, but you are choosing by putting that into the next sprint.
So, how do you think that really good software companies should approach the choosing? How do you make sure that you're not just getting comfortable and avoiding the hard thing, which is to make a choice?
That's literally the $1 million question, right? Sometimes the $10 million question. I think all of these questions have the big is and the big it depends, right? Because if you're in very early stage, your approach will be one. If you have 40 people, your approach will be another one. My passion and my experience has been mostly in the early stages. So talking about that phase, taking that as context, how do you do the choosing, how do you prioritize, how do you select what to work on? I think first you try to find product market fit, right? It's very early stages. You have an idea, you want to have you want to go to market with something. You have to choose what that something is. You did your research, you talk to a lot of different people. You try to identify a pattern on something that's strong enough, valuable enough, and it's viable that you can achieve. Start from the beginning. Don't just go building. I think that's a mistake many companies do. Let's hire a whole bunch of developers and let's build something. But what is something? It's like if you're going to build a building and you hire a whole bunch of builders, but you never paid for an architect to design the building, it's not going to work. Sure, they know how to build a building, but what are they building? And I think that's when you start to get into that mode of you just choose by default because all the builders are there and it's Monday morning and something needs to happen. So maybe let's start laying some bricks. But what's the vision? What is this going to look like in a few months from now? In the early stages, you have to be more intentional than any other stage, I think. You have to choose the problem that you're solving. You do your discovery. You start designing, envisioning this thing, and then you build and you go to market as early as possible. You get your signals, you remove the noise, and you continue choosing intentionally what the next thing is going to be. I don't think there's a magic recipe and you have to adapt. And that's where your experience kicks in. And it's only through trying and failing and seeing how things don't work for this situation or that other situation that you have this kind of ability to know how to balance or how to choose.
For sure. So earlier, You mentioned as well that one of the things that you learned is to not use frameworks or steps that you read online. I feel like
Um,
there's a personal story there about a time when you used a framework and it did
so,
not help you.
yes. There are a few stories. The ones that are top of mind are often about working with founders that read something and decided that, oh, we need to do this. This is how we need to work. I heard about this framework. I had to do this thing this way. And I'm a very skeptical person, and like I'm very critic about things. And that's what brings me to product as well. I like to analyze and observe and understand how things work and why they work that way. So when I read something, I love learning, and I'll read and I'll think about how this could help me, but I'm very skeptical of just running with someone else's idea or something I read online. So I think that has shielded me from reacting to something I read online and just doing it immediately. But if you're new to this startup world, like many founders are, if it's chaotic and it's your first time doing it, you're like, I need a map. Like, I need a way to think about this because there are so many things happening at once and I want to do a great job. So I need a map. And then you kind of start looking for frameworks. And then when something doesn't work, often you go, it's the wrong framework. That's why it's not working. I need another framework, right? The team is not working fast enough, according to my opinion. So I need another framework so we can move faster. Or we're not selling enough. Or maybe when our playbooks are not good enough, I need another framework. I need to write another way of doing things, whatever. So I think it's easy to react to new ideas on how to do better.
It's almost like a way of protecting yourself from having to face failure, right? You need another framework, another template instead of actually, this is not working and I need to look at why this is not working. It's not the framework.
Yeah. I like what he said about outsourcing failure. It's like, it's the problem is with the process and the framework, not with me not choosing or not adapting well enough.
Totally. And speaking of failure, do you think that people should use user feedback to guide product development? And if so, how much? Do you think that people overdo it, underdo it?
I think people should definitely understand their users and the people that they're solving the problem for, right? You're building this product for someone. It's not for yourself. Sometimes you kind of use it, sure, but if you build it only for you and you sell only to yourself, then that's not a very successful business. So you are building for someone else. You have to understand how they think. You have to understand their motivation more than just the words that they send to you on an email request. Like feedback, you want it as raw as possible, but you also don't want to stop there. You have to probe. You have to ask, why does it matter to you personally? Why are you so passionate about this? And so the first question, I think, definitely a yes. You have to use user feedback. You have to understand their needs. You have to understand your users. It's easy to do too little, like not enough. You get comfortable with, again, your processes, and there's so many things to do. You like building stuff, you like designing stuff, or kind of stay in that zone, in that mode. And you say, I'm focused. That's good. I'm being focused. I'm building stuff. And sure, you have to do that, but also you need to continuously discover. You need to continuously learn. I think there is such a thing as doing too much. I think you could overdo it, and I think some people do overdo it, where you become dependent on, unless I have user feedback, I'm not going to do anything. Almost like I have to prove that this is a good decision before I do it. And it's a thin line. You have to validate your assumptions. You have to learn, you have to continuously discover, but you cannot get into a space that unless I have proof, I'm not going to execute. You can't lose the confidence you have in the problem and the team and your vision. You need to be able to execute with that as well. And sometimes there's not enough feedback. Sometimes you haven't found product market fit yet, and you don't have a pool of people that you can easily reach out to. It's tough to recruit people to give feedback. So do as much as you can. Don't do too much. Don't be dependent on it alone or thinking that unless you have it, you can't make any decisions. But also don't just go blindly building stuff.
I totally relate to this because we're kind of at that stage where we don't yet have enough feedback coming in all the time that we can validate our decisions before we make decisions. So the only way to move forward, like you said, is to make a decision and be willing to be proven wrong by the market, which is a very uncomfortable place to be. And, it's kind of hard to get user feedback if you're still growing your user base. But what are your favorite methods for getting that user feedback? Especially if people don't necessarily want to jump on a call with you. Is there other ways that you can gather data from your users that you find that is useful?
Not sure about favorite way. I think there are a few different ways you could do it. In the early stage, you are hopefully close to your targeted user or persona, right? Do you know who you're solving it for? Hopefully, you have a few early users, people that are helping you test this idea. And I think having conversations with them is the best way. You can ask all those follow-up questions. You can understand their motivation better than just tracking events on your website, sending a whole bunch of metrics to some sort of event tracking tool and trying to make sense of that story by only looking at the numbers. You get some signals from that, but you don't get the motivation. You don't get how the person thinks and why it's important to them. So I think have direct conversations, close conversations, stay close to your users. And the early days should be, you have less users, but the users you do have, you know them, or you can get close enough to them, right? It's manageable to the point that you can look at an individual account, see how it's going, give them a call, ask a question. And if you're solving a strong enough problem and your early users are actually having their problems solved, I think they would be willing to talk to you. If you're struggling to get people talking to you, maybe they're not seeing enough value out of your product, which sucks really bad. But then hopefully they can give you some hints on, what would make it something valuable to them. But especially in the early days, it's hard to get around actually talking to people. If you have a bigger team and you have a whole lot of users, then you can have a process to talk to them once a week. I think talking to one or two users once a week, if you have a bigger team, is sweet. If you're building a new feature, I think you don't have to interview more than 4 or 5 people. It should be enough to give you enough insights.
And would you, as the product leader, would that fall into your responsibility to find people to talk to, or was that the sales team responsibility, or how did you kind of approach the actual reach out and getting people on the phone? Who did it?
Depending on the type of business, right? If you have an enterprise software and you sell into enterprise, usually the decision maker on the customer side is not the end user, or it could be not the end user, right? So you have a big manager somewhere trying to make a decision for a whole department, but he's not going to use the product. It will be the people on site, will be someone else under their management they will be using. The opinion will vary, and they often do not align between the person making the decision and the person actually using the product on the day-to-day. In terms of who is responsible for that, my experience with 2 other startups doing enterprise sales is that a lot of the feedback from the decision maker will be coming from the sales team. They'll be the ones doing discovery calls and trying to sell, understanding the pain points and navigating the decision-making process for that customer. And enterprises have very long decision-making processes. The process is slow. So all the blockers that the sales team hears from the decision makers, all those feedbacks will be coming from the sales team, right? I wouldn't expect a product leader or product team member to be selling to decision makers and going through the entire enterprise sales process to understand what's a blocker there. But I do believe it's the responsibility of the product team, the unit, to learn from the end users. And I think product leaders should be talking to users. Product team members should be talking to users. Developers should have, access to those learnings. Eventually, occasionally join some calls. It doesn't have to be a long 1 hour structured interview process all the time as well. You can be smarter about getting feedback and asking a question at the right time in your product when something happens. And then have a bit of a process with your team where once a week you sit down as a product leader and you kind of, hey, here are the last feedback messages we received about the feature we are building right now. Bring that awareness to the team. They don't have to necessarily join every call, but you can bring those learnings to them. And bring it as raw as possible. Paint your picture, give the framing you think it has to be given as well later as you build your direction, your strategy, but also share the raw feedback.
Yeah, so everyone is kind of aligned and has the same context to work with. And can you give me an example where user feedback significantly influenced the product's direction?
I have one example that happened actually more than once, or in two different startups, same example, which is, I guess, why it comes to mind. And it was us committing to build a full offline support to the app. The app is going to work fully while offline. Right? There's a lot of moving parts to that, a lot of not only technical requirements, but product requirements and UX requirements and considerations on the design and the journey that people go through, etc. And we kind of committed to it because one, we heard from decision makers on the customer side, like, oh, the competition does offline support, unless there's offline support, we can't make it happen. It's a must have. Or in other instances, we went on site and re-experienced ourselves areas with no connectivity. And that just kind of confirmed our opinion that offline support was needed. But then as we started working on that decision, on that direction, we did a few rounds of interviews, talked to the end user, and we learned that they had already adapted to, as humans do, to areas with no connectivity. They just had a process where in the beginning of the day, when they were in the office, they planned their day. This is what I'm going to do today, as you normally do. And this is my focus for today. This is what I'm going to work on. I need to drive to this location. I need to do this job. For that, I need these documents. So they already had a mental process, right, to getting ready before I leave the office, which meant that we didn't have to design a full offline support. We could be smarter about designing this solution. We could be smarter about having a product feature where they could just say, tag these 4 folders. Everything inside those folders are available for me offline, and that's it. That's what I need for today. I don't need the whole app offline. So that's one example where we thought it was a must-have. We were told it was a must-have, but once we learned from the actual end user, and when we went on site and when we observed the situation, we then learned that actually there's a smarter way to solve it. And it just goes to say that users do know what's important to them, but they're not product experts. It's your responsibility to do the product. Now, there's that they will feed what they care about. They know what they want, but you know what the product needs. So go with that.
Yeah, totally. It's almost like the users sometimes can give you feedback that is a bit conflicting, or they already have a solution in mind to their pain point. And instead of talking to you about the pain point, they talk about the solution, and it's your job to dig a little bit deeper in some ways to kind of figure it out where the solution idea is coming from, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of a dent because everyone wants to be acknowledged, right? So you have to acknowledge and appreciate the feedback, but you have to dance around a little bit, like, oh, interesting. But why do you think that's important? Or how does that apply to your, I don't fully understand your day-to-day. Tell me a little bit more about it. And then how does this apply to that? Because, yeah, you're right. Everyone has opinions and ideas on how to solve the problem. Can you please just add this button here? They don't know the consequence of adding the button there, or the cost, or, they're not thinking about your product holistically as you are. So you have to probe and you have to understand, like, why do you need that button there? Or why do you think that's going to work? And then it's your job to make it work in the best way possible for the product and for the many, not just for that person.
Yeah, that's another thing that's really tricky in dealing with user feedback. It's how do you then take that feedback and prioritize and decide which feedback to set aside, which feedback to add to the product roadmap? Because you obviously have so much information and data to deal with.
Yeah, the secret is not to react to every single piece of feedback. You're going to act on it to the sense that you kind of processed, but don't feel forced to execute.
You mentioned before that it's easy to get a team to be like headless chickens and everyone is running into a different direction. Do you find that happens more because of a lack of direction or a lack of leadership or both? And any tips to avoiding that?
In my experience, when people have too many directions, it's more often than not because there is no direction. Then there's too many directions, if that makes sense. Right? By having no direction, you have multiple people going in different directions. So I think you need to start by having a clear direction. Good or bad, right or wrong, choose a direction and then start moving together into that direction. So I guess a tip is make sure you have one, make sure it's clear, make sure you communicate it, make sure it's well understood, and then you can start analyzing, running with it, probing, adapting. But first, you have to choose and communicate and bring everyone on board and make sure it was understood. Then if it's wrong, people will tell you, you'll figure it out, you learn about it, then you adapt. And I think the tip on doing that, on communicating, is to write it down. Like I like to have a one-pager. I like to bundle work into initiatives or projects more than just every 2 weeks we get a new piece of work from the backlog and we work on it. And I'm not the biggest fan of that approach. We have a direction, we have a strategy, an initiative, something we're going to do to make that strategy, to execute on that strategy, to make that statement real, something that we want to look in 2 months from now and say, this is now true. I expect this to be true if I execute on this strategy. This is how I define success or how we believe success looks like. I have a one-pager, right? One document, spend a decent amount of time on that document, not weeks, obviously, right? Because you want to communicate early, you want to get feedback on your strategy on that document as well. But write a one-pager, put into that one-pager why you're doing that, why you're doing the work you're doing. List what you're not doing. I love this idea of a negative roadmap. Like, these are the things we know we're not doing. There are many things that we may do that we don't know if we're doing. Some things can pop up, etc. We made a decision on doing this, but we also made a decision on not doing this and not doing this and not doing this. It's easier to write the things you know that you're not doing versus trying to detail everything that you are doing. So have that one page documenting those things and then write what success looks like, how people visualize what a successful project or initiative or strategy looks like. Because then you can start giving autonomy to the team within that context, within that strategy, to make decisions, to change course, to approach something differently. Because I think sometimes people think that if you detail everything, if you plan everything and you design everything up front, then there's not enough space to adapt, to change, And in contrast, other people think that autonomy is you can do whatever you want. Like you give a team full autonomy and they can do anything and everything. I think that's also wrong. You want to have a clear direction, a clear scope, a clear context, and then say, hey, team, within this context, within this strategy, within this direction, you have autonomy. Now you can make decisions, you can adapt, you can even change the work halfway through. It's less of that. You have a 2-week sprint, everything has been decided and signed off. On the first Monday, you have 2 weeks to build this, and this is all you're building. And let's not lose focus by working on something else, I think that's too strict. I think it's more like, for the next month, we're focusing on this thing. Here's the strategy. Here's the one-pager. Here's what success looks like. Here's what we're not doing. Here's what we would like to be true in a month from now. Here's all the feedback we received. Here's our assumptions. Now go. There's freedom. There is autonomy within that month, within that scope, within that project for you to change. If you get feedback halfway through that tells you that this button should actually be a drop down that sits somewhere else, you can change. You can totally change as long as the definition of success is still met, as long as it's still within the same direction of enabling this for that person at that part of their journey. You can change your solution halfway through. You can change your solution on the last week of that month and do something else instead because you learned the last 3 weeks that through research and through actual implementing, you can throw away your code, put it in the bin, and you still be successful with 1 week worth of work based on the lessons you had and the success being met for that strategy.
I love that. It's a really interesting way of viewing product leadership as well, I think, because you are really setting people up for success when you're giving them a clear boundaries to work with, but also not just thinking for them, doing the thinking for them. So it's really allowing your team members to kind of take ownership of their part of the journey, while also making sure that everyone is rowing the same direction. Having a direction means that you have to be willing to be wrong, and that can be really confronting.
Yeah.
Being willing to fail and say, actually, we thought that this was going to work and it totally did not. It's not comfortable. But like you said, it is actually better than not having a direction for the sake of, keeping your options open.
Yeah, you have to normalize failure to everyone, to you and the team. Right? You can't expect the team not to fail, but you can fail. Or you won't feel comfortable failing if you're trying to get everyone else to never fail. You have to normalize failure, and you have to build a culture. And I think culture is so important on this, all the psychological safety and everything that comes with it. But you need to build this culture. Not only that it's okay to fail, but also that you're not your job, right? You and your job are different things. You have a role, and you're playing that role, and you're making decisions. And there are many things that go into decisions. There are many variables that go into something working or not working. And you simply not your job. You can be wrong and still be a great leader and a great person and be very right the next few decisions you take. Everyone has ideas and everyone will make wrong decisions. You want to judge someone by their ability to persist through exploring those ideas and then finding the right idea. The one single bad idea, it's so small compared to the success you can get to after exploring many wrong ideas or after being wrong a couple of times. It goes back to what we discussed in the beginning. If you have velocity, if you can iterate quickly, then people won't remember the wrong decisions you took. They will remember the journey you went through and the result of it.
That's so true. Like, nobody's remember all the times you failed. They remember the one time that you didn't fail. And if, failure equals learning, then you're in the right path. But going back to product building, curious to hear your thoughts on what's the most overrated piece of advice that you hear about building products, and why do you disagree with it?
I have my favorite one, and it's not so much of advice that you get given all the time, but for some reason is default thinking to many people. Or maybe they hear for someone. I personally don't hear this often, but I hear others thinking about this all the time. That by hiring more people, you'll make things move faster. Right? It's that idea of, if only we had more developers, like we need to scale, we need to grow, we need to hire more people, and then we'll be able to chase all those ideas we have. Again, it's back to, if you have no direction, you're pursuing many things, or if you don't have a clear vision, you're chasing whatever comes to you, and then you think that the problem to your solution is to hire more people so you can explore more, you can build more things, and your product can be bigger and more complete, and then everything else will work out. And I think that overrated piece of advice, or even the wrong advice, because by hiring more people, you are also hiring a lot more complexity, and you put a lot more noise, and you sometimes distance yourself from the tools and doing the work and listening to the feedback and making the decisions. But also hiring is super hard. Getting a group of people that work well together is a full-time job. And then if you're doing that full-time, you're not doing everything else you should be doing full-time. And also, I think there's a bit of, because of social media and everything else and the way people position things, there's a certain kind of amount of glory that you get from like, oh, you're hiring and we raise money and we have steady roles and everyone wants to grow super fast and scale everything. And I think there's a lot of negative effects to that, I think, to be in that position of growing too fast, too quickly, too big, too quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. I mean, You actually end up realizing when you have more than maybe two people in your team that 50% of your time now is spent managing people, making sure that they have, direction and context and the tools that they need to do their best job. And definitely everything becomes more complicated. I totally agree. And so let's just say I want to build product faster and I'm not going to necessarily hire because that's not the solution to my problems. What would be an alternative way to think about, building things faster or increasing my output as a team without necessarily hiring more people?
There's a level of expectation management that needs to happen to start. I think the first thing you have to question is, what do you mean by faster? Why do you want to go faster? Why do you need to go faster? I think often people assign or relate faster to doing more. And I think a good way to go faster is to do less. You don't have to hire more people so you can do more stuff and be faster about doing more. You can go faster by prioritizing better. You can go faster by saying no more often. You can go faster by being more focused on the most valuable thing, which forces you to make decisions, which puts you in a tough position because you could be wrong and then it doesn't feel good. The whole thing kicks in. But the more intentional you are, the less complex you make things, the easier, the smoother it is. And smooth is fast. So I think that's an alternative way to move fast. Just be more intentional, be more specific, make a decision, be more decisive. And I would argue that velocity is more important than speed. I mean, I'm not a scientist. If I can try to explain my interpretation of it, at least in the product world, is in my experience, for me, speed is about just moving fast in any direction, right? It's covering a lot of ground, is moving really fast. But velocity is moving fast in one direction. It is how much into that direction did you move to? It's less about just nonstop moving really fast. It's intentional movement in a single direction. And then overall, in the long term, that's what you need. That's why I meant that expectation management needs to happen as well, because you need to understand why you have this crave to move faster. And almost every founder has it, like, oh, why is the team not moving fast enough? Or how can we move faster? And then to my overrated comment there about hiring more people, I haven't been to a single startup where there wasn't, for a period, this sentiment of, when it was just the four of us, the six of us, we were way faster and we were able to achieve all these things. Why can't we achieve that now? Why is our pace not as good as it was before? And then guess what? You increase the amount of complexity in this whole ecosystem. You put more people into the mix, the different dynamics. Now there are politics happening here and there. The process is more complicated. Because you have more people, you believe you can do more. You have to keep it simple. You have to grow when you have to grow, but again, be intentional on when that.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's super relevant. I mean, we're talking a lot about all the lessons that you've learned throughout your time. So I'm curious to hear, what lessons are you specifically applying to your startup REAP?
The two big lessons I'm bringing to REAP today are the most relevant ones. One is going to market quickly and proving that your value proposition is there and strong enough before you scale anything, especially your team. So we were saying, I'm trying to be intentional about growing, about raising, when to raise, if we need to raise, when to hire, do we need to hire? So going to market as quickly as possible with the team that we have, proving that we have a strong enough solution, that we are generating enough value, find that core repeatable thing we can offer to the market before we think about raising money, hiring people, and leading. Yeah. So go to market quickly and get ready before you scale. In real commitment in the form of cash, not words, right? From the early users and the friends and the family, the mom test thing is real. So I think go to market quick, hit reality, get real commitments, get in the form of cash or some other. I would use it, yeah, for sure. It sounds interesting. And then the second one is choosing the type of business you want to build, and understanding there are different a lot of startups that were playing the VC game, right? So let's raise money, big money. Let's hire a bunch of people. Let's scale really quickly. Let's go really big. Let's make this a gigantic thing, right? And it's a totally valid game. It's a great game. Many people play that game. It's not the only game. I don't have to play that game. So the second biggest lesson for me, depending on the dynamics and the consequences and the benefits and the downsides of being that startup that wants growth at all costs and it's going to scale really quick and it's going to bring massive returns versus being a lifestyle business. Try to bootstrap, provide great value, and you can make big sales and you can sell to enterprise if you need to. You can do great things by keeping it simple, by keeping it small, by being intentional, by having a clear direction. And if you're wrong, changing the direction. So I think the second biggest lesson for me is you can choose the kind of business you want to build, but you have to do it early. Because once you choose and things start to work, then some decisions are made for you.
It sounds like you guys are going through a pivotal moment with Reap. Are you going to be doing significant changes to the product, or are you changing the market? You went from working on it part-time to now working full-time. How do you think that the product is going to be impacted as a result of that?
So I went from working, I would say, almost 2 hours a week. So it was way less than part-time to a full-time, which means it's now a big change. Like I can invest way more to it than 2 hours a week. Sometimes not even that. The consequence of that, so we're going through a merge right now. It's a functional merge. Someone that we met in the States had a similar idea, wanted to work on a similar problem, and we're now kind of merging. They have a small business, we're now merging to pursue this together. The biggest impact of me going full-time, the other co-founders going full-time, and this merge is that now we have someone that's an expert in this industry, someone that has deep knowledge about this space. Because my passion is on building and creating products for people, for humans, right? And making the best and the nicest and the greatest looking solution that feels and behave naturally, natural, and it's smooth and so on. So my passion is on creating, on making. Now for us, this new phase is having someone like Tom that fully understands the industry means we can tackle bigger, more meaningful, deeper problems. And in different countries or market. Reap has been very focused because it was, again, a side business on New Zealand and New Zealand only. We connect to the stock exchange, the New Zealand Stock Exchange. We only cover New Zealand. We built everything to cover Australia as well and other markets. We never implemented anything like that. So the next phase for us is, and the challenge for us is bringing Reap to different countries and different markets and understanding the behavior and the culture and the patterns of those different regions and the content that they have available and standardizing everything. Because one of the how our direction might change slightly. We're going through some new initiatives that will make it public soon. But currently the goal of Reap is very much on standardizing information and make it interesting and easy to consume. Different markets have different informations available. The challenge for us will be on standardizing that as well. And then this new phase of making all that knowledge, all that kind of wealth of content easy to
Awesome.
find.
That sounds really exciting.
To analyze.
And also quite daunting, but that's the fun of it. And if you had
Yeah,
to sum up your
exactly,
approach
exactly. I'm
to
super
building
excited.
great products in one sentence, what would it be?
Start from the beginning. Start from the beginning. Discover, divine, then build.
And that's it. So
Don't
it's
go
like
like
one good
straight into
quotes that
building.
more founders should have
Start from the
posted all
beginning.
over their bedroom. It's
Quicker
been really
solution
nice to
here.
chat, and yeah, very valuable insights that I can definitely relate as a founder. So I really appreciate your time, Matt. Hope you enjoyed this podcast, and thank you so much for listening. We release new episodes every 2 weeks, so make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts so you don't miss a new episode. I'll see you in a couple of weeks.